Welcome to another broadcast of Philosophical Perspectives on the Artist First Radio Network. All past shows are available as free downloads. Visit artistfirst.com. And now here he is, your host, Arthur D. Schwartz.
Hi, hello everybody. Well, I'm really looking forward to tonight's show because I'm going to be talking about my book. The name of the show tonight is Ethical Empowerment and In-Depth Talk. You know, I've talked to a lot of people about my book, and usually I emphasize the first third of the book, which is the theory that I propound, that I propose, and there's a lot that I say that's of a controversial nature, socio-political, economic, as well as in the personal realm as well. And so, for some reason, I think maybe it's my own reticence, or for whatever reason, I haven't gotten into a lot of detail talking about it in different venues. Obviously, it's in the book, but I don't really talk about it too much, or in as much detail as I do in the theory of the ethics, the ethical theory that I propose or propound. So I'm going to get right to it, and I'm going to talk about what I feel are the implications of the book, and that I explore through the really basically three-quarters of the book. Now, while I was thinking about doing the show, I was thinking about reverse engineering. So basically, my theory has all to do with the ethical or moral intentionality, and its effectuality, the effects, the consequences, and so forth. And I'm wondering are they mutually exclusive, or does an ethical theory have to be if it's to be valid, can you reverse engineer, so to speak? Can you take the consequences, the results, and then work back and then come up with that theory? I think the answer is clearly absolutely not with any kind of certainty. But what does it say about ethics? Why we can't look at the results? So I'm going to talk about real estate, for example, or I talk about controversial or so-called pseudoscience, or when we talk about my ideas for a patent system, or conspiracies, and some of the things that I'm going to go into more detail here. And do these consequences, could they be reverse engineered so that they must result in a particular kind of theory that I have evolved? And so clearly the answer is not, but at the same time, there is something there that would seem to make it plausible or possible for the consequences to be germinated, you might say, by the theory. In other words, the theory has to allow for these consequences as shown in the particular positions that I'm making. And this is, I always look at science as being a very relevant discipline for the kind of topic I'm talking about right here. Because in science, there are procedures, there's scientific method, of course, there's, peer review and all kinds of things that scientists do, and yet scientists disagree. Not all scientists believe in the same thing or propound the same theory yet but they still have something that is considered to be objective that they would say puts it above the fuzzy realm of morality or art. Science is supposed to be objective, and some would argue that philosophy is subjective. But you see, science really has as much difference within itself as does philosophy. Just because people or the practitioners can agree on methodologies, agree on basic principles, doesn't mean that they agree on everything. So why should it be any different in ethics? You see, my book, I feel, is actually a scientific kind of orientation because in some ways I will tell you that I modeled my theory along the lines of science. Not that it's like science, but it's that it provides a way of going about the business of ethics, you might say. Now, we will disagree on many points, just like scientists disagree. The problem with ethics, however, that their theories are historically have been so inadequate. The utilitarian theory, Kant's categorical imperative, and so many other theories. I mean, they're just basically it doesn't really enlighten very much. They're there. It actually doesn't really move beyond the classroom. I don't think most ethical thinkers act. For example, if they're utilitarian, wonder about the greatest good for the greatest number. I don't think they actually try to do some kind of calculation to come up with their answers because you can't do that. And so what I have is a theory which is in a general movement towards what I feel is the basis of ethics, which I've said many times is actually universal love. Okay, I might return to this later. And by the way, tonight it's just going to be me talking. I'm not going to even take any breaks because I am so enthused right now to get across issues that I've been very important to me, and for some reason I've been a little gun shy. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am now going to take off. I should put on the gloves. I should put on the gloves, or should I take off the gloves? I'll take off the gloves. Now, the theory that I've evolved has resulted, at least in my mind, in propounding and proposing on many controversial issues and proposals that I make. And so, as I got my book on my lap here, I'm going to kind of go through it and talk about some of the things that I go into, on this, beginning with about a third of the way into it, where I start getting into issues. Now, one of the things I really find fascinating is this concept of pseudoscience. I must tell you, just go through Wikipedia, and any time any scientific material covered in an article is the slightest bit out of the mainstream, you can see how they bend over backwards trying to make sure the reader knows, well, this is pseudoscience. Do a scan on Wikipedia and see how many times the term pseudoscience appears in these kinds of areas. I almost feel it's a little bit disingenuous. I think we can agree about certain things being in the mainstream, certainly, and I think we all have to respect the mainstream. We all have to respect tradition, but by no means does that mean we have to always go along with it. If that were the case, there would never be any progress whatsoever, virtually. Now, the thing about science is that they have these basic principles, whether it's in medicine or whether it's in physics, whether it's in curing cancer or something called free energy, and many other things as well. But those are the two areas that I'm actually most familiar with. Medicine, or not medicine, but health, human health, in terms of the alternative inventions that what I'm talking about here, and in free energy, the notion that energy, it's possible for energy to be somehow sucked out of not actually the atmosphere, that's one possibility, but actually be sucked out of the fabric of space and time. Now, of course, scientists would look, they would just laughable. It violates the law of the conservation of energy. It's impossible. First of all, scientific laws aren't legislated. There's no legislature in the heavens that hands down laws. Laws are common behavior of phenomena that is deemed to be inviolate, that it has to happen, but in nature. But there are then we have anomalies, and somehow the anomalies are trying. It's difficult to explain anomalies because they don't quite fit in. And if you're a professor and you really want to focus on, some of these anomalies like parapsychology, the psychic realm, you could probably lose your job because you're too much enamored of anomalies, of what's outside the norm. Yes, lose your funding, lose your job. That's what happens. And it's kind of a sorry picture because I actually admire scientists. I admire science. It's just that I feel that the institution is being held back. It could be doing so much more. Now let's talk about two main figures in science, in so-called pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, phony science, which may not be phony, but I think there is a lot of pseudoscience going on by people who are bending over backwards to make sure that these inventors never see the light of day. That's what's really pseudoscience, because that is so unscientific. Look at the paradox. Look at the hypocrisy. That a scientist feels it's okay to suppress or prevent the free inquiry. Back in the late 50s, there was, some of you might, his name, the doctor was named, I think, Reich, Reich, I guess it's pronounced, Wilhelm Reich, I believe. And he had a lot of strain. He was a colleague of Sigmund Freud, I believe. And but he came here, and the FDA actually, like stormtroopers, went in there and took his equipment away and burned his documents, and it's just frightening. And this is not. You look it up yourself. It's actually a fact. It's even reported in Wikipedia. Believe it or not, I remember that. And I'm just going to just give you his name right here. 1 second here. I think it's Wilhelm Reich. And he, let's see. Can't find it. But that's the name. It's Wilhelm Reich. And here it is right here, Wilhelm Reich. And he came up with these ideas. It seemed kind of crazy. One of them had to do with curing cancer, I believe. Another one had to do with some kind of orgasm machine that had tremendous health effects. I mean, the guy was definitely out of the mainstream, but at the same time he was brilliant. As I said, he was a colleague of Sigmund Freud, and so yet he was a danger to no one. That's the thing. He was just a danger to no one. Now, there's another doctor named, he wasn't a medical doctor, but Royal Rife, R-I-F-E, invented a device which he believed cured cancer and also many infections. It has to do with resonance. So he had two aspects to it. Was a telescope which claimed to be extremely powerful and could actually do what the electron microscopes cannot do. Our modern electron microscopes cannot do. Is that because it's under, a radiation is used in the microscope, electron microscopes, it destroys all living material. So the viruses, for example, that are being inspected are killed by the microscope. And Rife, this is not Reich, this is R-I-F-E, Royal Rife, Raymond Royal Rife, through a very elaborate refraction created a microscope that many have testified to the accuracy of that. It was just they could see things that are just absolutely no other optical microscope could do. And the funny thing about it is, in my book, I mentioned that only a few years ago, I think at Arizona State University, I believe, that doctors were doing much the same thing that Rife did, but except it was more high tech. It was a more high tech way of getting the same results. And the thing is, what happens in all these cases is that these men or women are just completely victimized, repressed, lives ruined, all their money put into this enterprise and just washed away. And it's such a seedy history. And the thing is, people just close your eyes. Oh, they're quacks. Oh, they're just they're done for public safety. What a bunch of baloney! I'll tell you what it was done for, ladies and gentlemen. It was done for one of the oldest reasons of motivations ever known. That's always been the case in human civilization. It was done for money, pure and simple. Money. You know what? You know where's a lot of money? In the cancer business. Cancer. I've heard it said from more than one person who works in the medical establishment that the big pharmaceutical companies really do not want to cure cancer. They want to come up with nice pharmaceuticals that can control it and alleviate it. But there's so much money in it. It's a lot like war. Nixon coined the term, I think, the war on cancer back in the 70s. Well, it's a lot like war because it's something that really produces a lot of money, and money and profit is while it's necessary and in and of itself not a bad thing at all, when it turns into pure greed, then it becomes a very bad thing. Then it subverts everything we as Americans think our country represents, and that's the subterfuge. It's money. That is the weak link. Money. Doing something not because it's just, doing something not because it's right, doing something not because it's going to help people, but whether or not it's profitable. The pharmaceutical companies, they won't even investigate botanicals because there's no money in it. And I don't really blame them per se. They're a business. But it's the system. The system is corrupt. The system is corrupt to its core. Until this profit is an important motivating factor. There's no question about it. But until we learn to balance profit with justice, profit with morality, profit with love, until we can balance those things, we will continue to degrade. Talking about degrading in war, we will degrade our institutions. We will degrade our public morals. We will degrade our strength because we've lost sight of what this country is supposed to be about. And so in the case of scientific inventions, so much great things have come about. Absolutely. Who can deny how much good has come from science? But here's the thing, and I believe this. What can't be denied, and this is where others disagree, is that it can do so much more. So much more if we just kind of take off those tethers and let it do its thing. Now, in my book, I have a few ways that I go about it. One term I have is plural perspectivism. So it's a combination between perspectivism and pluralism. Perspectivism is just each perspective is your kind of your own truth. Nietzsche, advocated that, but he was, as all things Nietzsche is complicated. He doesn't really say one thing consistently, which intentionally. But the pluralism, of course, is a respect for a great diversity of beliefs. But when I say plural perspectivism, I mean the eager, aggressive seeking of opinions to challenge your beliefs. That is not what is done in science. In science, they are like, ostriches that stick their head in the sand, They keep on trying. This is, Thomas Kuhn, in his famous book on philosophy of science, he recognized this. And also the other philosopher of science who Kuhn actually got a lot of his material from, which I will get that later when I have a chance to. But his name escapes me at the moment. But that they were saying that scientists spend their time trying to defend the paradigms. And it's actually it's the truth. I mean, that's just what it is. They're defending the paradigms, and a lot of good comes about it. A lot of good comes from it. And I think to a significant degree, that has to be the case. The scientist I was referring to is Michael Polanyi, and he did very similar work with that Kuhn did. Actually, Kuhn acknowledge that many of his ideas were really derived from Michael Polanyi's name. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. Well, they're defending the paradigms rather than seeking the truth. What we need are institutions of paradigmatic contest. Institutions of challenging the paradigm. That's what we actually need. We need the government and the research laboratories and the universities need to come up with institutionalized challenges to the paradigms, when in fact they're doing the exact opposite thing. If you challenge a paradigm, you might very well lose your job or lose your funding and have your career smashed. It's happened many times, unfortunately. And I'm not making it up. Look, do the research. It happens. And so just think about it. Science is paying their scientists, the institutions of science are paying scientists not to do inquiry, to keep it in the narrow. Now, that seems like it's kind of, oh, come on, how could that possibly be the case? How could that possibly be the case? Well, it is the case. The word I'm looking at, what I was reaching for there, that I use is Centers for Contra-Paradigmatic Research. We need to be paying folks to challenge the paradigms, to see if we're missing something. We need not firing them, not taking away their money, not taking away their not taking away their reputation. Pay them to try to knock down what we think is true, and they do not do that. If centers for contra-paradigmatic research were instituted across the board in governmental, university, and corporate venues, unbelievable progress would be made. It would change everything. But you see, this is just typical of what I'm trying to say, that we need to get away from greed and go toward the truth, guided by love. Yes, that guided by love, because that's what it's all about. Now, that doesn't mean we won't be making money. People will make, I would argue, people would make lots more money. Under the system I envisage, the world will become a much wealthier place. The world will become a much wealthier place, although perhaps it might not have as many multi-billionaires. That might possibly, and I would have nothing against that, but in terms of the things that I see, it would even the playing field somewhat. But there's plenty of room for super abundance. And the thing is, what would the result be? It's that that poverty would essentially be abolished. That people would always be striving for their best, but we'd be able to provide the basic needs. Basic needs, people think have to be fought for, because it's a capitalist society. It's all about dog eat dog. Well, I would say the opposite, because how many scientists and great thinkers and great achievers of all sorts never saw the light of day because they just spent their whole life or their whole lives trying to trying to satisfy their basic needs. And so that's the world we have now. If we can supply basic needs and yet inspire at the same time for people to achieve and to grow and to invent and to do good things and to help each other and to help themselves, and yet their basic needs. In America, it seems that's immoral. You have to earn that. What? So because you haven't met your basic needs, you die. I mean, the thing about the medical care, there's all this rancor about national health care. I mean, that is basically, I hate to quote one of those radical conservative radio hosts, Michael Savage, but he says, liberalism is a mental disease. Well, no, liberalism isn't any more of a mental disease than conservatives like Michael Savage. However, this lust for money, this lust for denying the true equal rights, universal rights of all mankind for basic health and well-being, that is a mental disease. That is a fundamental mental disease where the brain, the mind, has become completely lopsided in favor of self-interest, like Ayn Rand. I mean, speaking of, nutcases, I'll use the vernacular. And again, I like some of the things I think the Atlas Shrugged was a really entertaining book, even though the movie sucked. The recent her was absolutely atrocious, particularly the third part. It was laughable, but the book itself was quite entertaining, I thought. But her figures are cartoonish. It's all about self-interest. Me. No, it's about me and you. That's what it's about. It's about us all. Love thy neighbor as thyself. It applies to you. It applies to me. It applies to self-interest. It applies to the interests of others. And that's why the thriving in Aristotle's eudaimonia, the human flourishing, human happiness in his terms, is about happiness on the fullest sense. And in my view, the only way to do that is to be happy as an individual. But how can you be happy as an individual if your collectivity, if your society, if your world is in misery? Isn't it both? Hasn't it always been both? Isn't that embedded in the very nature of human consciousness? Come on. It's black and white. If you think it's all about me, meaning yourself, you are mentally disabled. If you think it's only about the other person, then you're also equally mentally disabled. Now, you can be a saint and all giving to others and all that. That's fine. That's fine. But the thing is, even that saint has to look after herself or himself, because if he or she ends up dying because she's just giving, guess what? Her sainthood on earth reached a premature demise, and so maybe that might deny her of her sainthood because she died too young. Wasn't necessary. It's all about a balance. All through philosophy, you have this disequilibrium between ego or altruism. It is both, as clear as day. It's two sides of a coin. Love yourself, love your neighbor. What does that mean? It means understanding what it means to cross that barrier of consciousness between individuals and the collectivity, and we're all part of the whole, but we all are ourselves too. And so that's the nature of things. And so in my book, I think I'm not going to, I've told you, I'm going to focus more now on some of these specific subjects. I was just talking about so-called pseudoscience. There is lots of pseudoscience, there's no question about that. But the thing is, the really shocking thing is that scientists who suppress individuals from freely pursuing what they believe is the truth, they themselves are laughably pseudoscientists, and they shame science, by the way. It's a shame. Any scientist who tries to repress another from freely researching his idea and trying to market it and tries to prevent the opportunity through suppression and through lying and cheating and violence, that is just a corrupt, shameful act. I don't care how much how good that person would do. He's done far worse by preventing others to rightfully make a contribution without obstruction from the powers that be. Now, so let me just go into another area. It's very similar to the whole conspiracy thing, the conspiracies. A lot of conspiracies are farces, but a lot of them have an awful lot of truth to it, and it's very similar to this suppression of evidence. I mean, suppression of evidence or suppression of inventions are really a kind of a conspiracy also, because the same thing happens. Once you start getting too close to the truth, you get all this interference and all this sham and all this repression and all the magic marker blackouts that still are blacked out after, let's say, 50 years after Kennedy was killed, for example. Give me a break. Why don't people just look in the mirror and say, I'm not going to take it anymore. I want the truth. I don't think the founding fathers of this country really had this in mind. I really don't. I think Thomas Jefferson is turning over in his grave looking at some of these farces that we have in politics today. It's embarrassing. Really embarrassing. And why and where does that come from? Oh, could maybe that be money? Could money have something to do with it? Yeah. Hey, how much money was spent in the last presidential election? You want to call embarrassing? Listen, when the selling of the president in 1968. Again, I have a terrible mind for names. I must admit that I have a hole in my head when it comes to remembering names. So, but the selling of the president was really a good book. It was on the Nixon Humphrey campaign in 1968, and the famous the book had the picture of Nixon on the pack of cigarettes, because he was just basically the president became a commodity, a package of cigarettes. And it's just, of course, every election's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And so we have this spectacle of all this money, and because it's not like we're having intelligent conversation. No, we're having these productions. We're having these slick ads. What a joke. It has completely corrupted politics. Completely, and I want to get this. His name is McGinnis, right? I believe so. I should have it right here. Well, anyway, I know his name, and then what happens is it goes blank. That's the way that I really, speaking about mental disorders, I do have a hole in my head, like I said, when it comes to memory, when it comes to remembering. It's always been that way. I have a good friend who just knows, Joe McGinnis. Here it is, Joe McGinnis, The Selling of the President, 1968. He actually, I believe recently he died just a few years ago. And the thing is, we have this combination of all this money spent on politics. I mean, isn't that obscene? Isn't that obscene? And here's another obscenity. This idea that everyone should vote. Some people want to make it mandatory that everyone should vote. Excuse me. I don't vote in local elections because I don't pay attention to it. If I vote in a local election, I would look at the name I like, and I'd pull the lever. I don't want to really spread my ignorance around. If I don't know anything about the election, I'm better off sitting home and let the people who paid attention to it vote. This is one of those nonsensical platitudes. Oh, everyone should vote. No, they shouldn't. If you haven't paid to the election, sit home. There's nothing democratic about that, except if you believe democracy is complete ignorance. We think this is the way we think in this country, and again, it's the amendments to the Constitution. It's like we take these things and then they become these carved in stone, and so then they can't be changed because this is the way, like the gun amendment, the Second Amendment. It's unbendable. We have the thing in our head. Oh yeah, well, so for example, everyone should have a gun. Everyone should vote. Oh, brother. Oh, brother. That is just so. So this is what I talk about in my book. In other words, use your brain, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the situation and return to what makes sense. What is right in your opinion? Doesn't make it mean that it is right. I'm not saying that anyone has any more say than anybody else in terms of forming a judgment. But the point of the matter is, like in science, when you have rules of evidence and rules of procedure and scientific method and in peer review and so forth and so on, they have a basis, a base understanding of how something is true or false. In ethics, it comes back to love. It comes back to a duality between self and other, and then it can be broken down. I break it down in just three ways. It's not the only way to do it, but this is what I've come up with: fairness, beneficence, and compassion. Fairness for self, fairness for others. Beneficence for self, beneficence for others. Compassion for self, compassion for others. So you really have six. And it's more than six because it's a continu. It's not really. I call them dualisms, but they're not really dualisms because I do realize it's like a polarity. But I use the word dualisms because we need to think. Otherwise, thinking is more difficult when we just don't look at the extreme poles and then make then negotiate the difference. And so this is a method combined with some other things. Combined with consensus, combined. With a sense of a dialectic, a sense of interchange of ideas, a sense of plural perspectivism, where we now get beyond our ego and really try to weigh our opinions against the opinions of others. What happens is people are afraid to even look at another point of view because, God forbid, it seems to me, I remember a few years back, and I looked for it. I couldn't find the I did the research and I didn't find the instance. But what I seem to remember, and maybe somebody can fill it in for me. But I seem to remember that the vice president made a comment that the Chinese have an advantage when it comes to, I think, space research or some other area of research because, they don't have the democratic system, of course, and so they don't have some of the distractions that we have. This is Vice President Biden. And then Rush Limbaugh got on his high horse, and I remember him saying this, and I could never find, maybe I just dreamt this, but I remember I was listening on the radio, and Rush Limbaugh was on his high horse saying, how dare Vice President Biden, how dare him talk that the Chinese are better than us. Well, coming from Rush Limbaugh's mouth, I can see where I'm not surprised. One of those knee-jerk, myopic things. Oh, well, because they're Chinese, because they're a dictatorship, and they are, because they're totalitarian, and they are, that somehow they can't do anything right, anything that they can't be better than us in any other way. Again, stupidity. The truth is, non-democratic countries do have certain advantages because they don't have the infighting that a democracy has to have in order to do their business. Because we represent we acknowledge other points of view. I actually want to bring in more points of view because I want people to eagerly ask for confrontation, ask for challenges. That's my view. That's good. What we have in America now with the political party system is something more like the Chinese because we have, the polar out because the Republicans and Democrats don't talk to each other because, they're just all they're interested in is staying in power. So I think, I know I'm doing a lot of rambling here, but I hope you see. I hope that you see a direction I'm going here, because the direction I'm going is. Break down the barriers to freedom. Break down the barriers to love. Break down the barriers to suppression. That's what I'm talking about. Whether it's a political party, and in the book I talk about abolishing all political parties, have an independent political system. By the way, I've had this point of view since my freshman year in college. I have the paper, 1970. I just want to put that in. I just want to get that in there. It's, some parts of the country in California, I think in Washington State, I believe, they're doing these, nonpartisan primaries. I really think it's a great movement forward. But, again, this is a block, a barrier. The word self-realization is another word for freedom. Self-realization means that you have lifted up the barriers, taken away the obstacles, so that you are free to be you, to be the person you choose to be, because it's not being repressed either from within or from without. A political party is an obstruction. Now, there are a lot of obstructions that I talk about in my book. One of the instructions I talk about in my book is, in my view, private real estate. Oh, he's a communist. Oh, he's a communist. No, I'm not. In fact, I'm very libertarian in many respects. But this idea, I came up with it when I was, a number of years back when I was, really a couple of 2 or 3 years away from finishing my book, and I wrote. It took me about 10 years or 11, maybe, 6 or 7 years writing it. Another 6 years researching it, and I wasn't not aware of Henry George, the self-trained economist who came up with the idea of the single tax. And he wanted basically all property to essentially be owned by the public, but that would not include buildings, because his view was, he wanted to get this perfect state of nature, so it was the land. Anyway, that was silly. That would never work. It would never work. But I do feel that in the world today, real estate is a blockage. It's stagnant, and that we would be better off with turning rental income and replacing that, and you taking that and replace taxes. I advocate a system of zero taxation, because the taxation would be rental income from the public real agencies, and I think that the world would be flourishing. We'd all be wealthier. That's just my view. Now, I realize that this is something that virtually no one's going to agree with, but it's the interesting thing about it is Herbert Spencer. Actually, the Henry George got the idea mostly from Herbert Spencer, and it goes back even further beyond that. Again, my brain, the whole of my brain are preventing me for a moment coming up with the English economist who I think with one of the had moved in that direction. But basically, Herbert Spencer really, in his first book, Social Statics, articulated this view, and then Spencer in Progress and Poverty at the end of the 19th century. It became quite a movement actually in this country. But I actually advocate something even more radical than that. But I feel that it would liberate capitalism, because from the real estate base, everything would be funded, and then people would be free to do research, would be free to produce. It would the barriers that some real estate, not all cases of course, but some real estate is just a bottleneck to the flow of capital in a country, and so once again, what I'm talking about here is freedom. To self-realization means not only of an individual, but the self-realization of a country, or of the society, or of the collective. Of course, I ultimately visualize a world society where there won't be countries, but it's not a concentrated country. It would be much more decentralized than anything we have today. And you see, once we have this barrier, the blocks to our society freed up, things like free energy are going to come along. Once you block the barriers to learning, to discovery, to invention, once you block the barriers or once you remove blockages that create war and famine. Think of world hunger. What a disgrace. Talk about barriers and blocks. 100 years ago, there might have been an excuse for world hunger, because we didn't have the transportation, we didn't have the agricultural science to actually feed the world. Today we do it. Today we do. We could feed the world. There's no justification for world hunger except for one thing. We lack the will to do it. There's no justification. None. Not under love. You see, when you look at love, the answer is there. So when I started this conversation, when I started this talk about reverse engineering, maybe you can see what I'm talking about. Can you reverse engineer from the effectuality, in other words, these kinds of proposals that I've been talking about, and then can you reverse engineer them to the theory itself that promulgates them? And I think, as well as science can in their field, in ethics we can too. We're not going to all agree about everything, but this idea of bringing down the arbitrary blocks, bringing down the arbitrary divisions of political parties, of religions, of nation states, of bringing down the divisions of ideology, the divisions of, for example, a non-competitive patent system. I haven't mentioned that until now, but it's also in my book. I propose that the patent system be completely overturned, that no one has a monopoly on a patent, that when an inventor has a patent, it can be leased and rented, so to speak, by anyone who will pay the inventor fees. The inventor would get nice and rich. Don't worry about the inventor. There'll be more competition because more companies would be using the invention to come up with a better product. But there wouldn't be monopolies that only care about keeping their monopolies. That's the problem with arbitrary division, like political parties who only care about getting reelected. That's what I'm calling self-realization, getting rid of the blocks and the barriers so we can truly emerge as of the great species that we are, not warlike, but peace-like, flourishing, blooming into the universe. And I think there are others, again, anyone who knows me knows that I totally believe there are other intelligent forms in the universe as well, if they're not here already, which they probably are. But this is what the universe is about, for us to become one with the universe, that is, and these artificial divisions are absolutely, because they are artificial, they are absolutely preventing, they're absolutely obstructing. They're absolutely threatening our very survival. They absolutely are. So that basically, I know I get a little hot in the collar and a little emotional about it, because you know why? That's who I am. I'm passionate about my beliefs. I don't think I don't think I have any monopoly on the truth more than anybody else. But what I try to do in this book is to spark conversation. A few times I call the type of thinking in my book holistic ethics or social harmonics. That's what you can compare it, you might say, to a holistic health, where you're kind of breaking unblocking the chakras, like in acupuncture or something like that. And I think this is our destiny. You see, Marx talked about destiny, but because he was an ideologue, he was one of the history's greatest obstructionists, because everything was just siphoned through his hardcore ideology, when his was just one perspective. He was the opposite of a plural perspectivist, such as myself. Centers for Contra-Paradigmatic Research. I want to say that again. I believe so much. If I can get that one term out there, I would call my book a success. Centers of Contra-Paradigmatic Research. That's what we need in government, in our universities, in our university laboratories, in our corporate research labs, in our medical centers. In fact, I'll go outside science, and everywhere we need to, because the paradigms are not exclusive to science. We need to be humble enough, because I believe humility is power. The humble person is powerful because he or she is open to the views of others, even if she might ultimately reject them. Humility is power. And so Well, we have centers for contra-paradigmatic research, not only in our laboratories, but in all fields of study. We would be better for that. Unfortunately, I think it's particularly science where it's most acute, and probably in the inner sanctums of political parties, and perhaps in the so-called free thinkers, hyphenated. In other words, radical atheists, who are the least free-thinking of all free thinkers, because they've turned their free thinking into an ideology. I have nothing against atheism at all. My only problem is it's when the atheists start telling me that they know how to think and I don't. They're the most dogmatic group I think that there is. I'm not kidding. Let's put this over. They're right up there at the top, from what I can see. So I'm going to kind of go full circle here. So my book really is about. It started off, and I promised I wouldn't talk too much about the philosophy, the theory that's in the first part of the book, and I think I've kept my promise. It's more about some of the issues that I talk about. My overall view of self-realization. Self-realization. I use this in my hypnotherapy practice. I should say, by the way, this book that I wrote, it's this theme I've had in my writing ever since I was in undergraduate school. And I wrote a book called Objective Ethics, and that was about just looking at ethical rules and just that they're not inviolate, that I've kept that belief all my whole life, that the ethical standard, utilitarian standard and so forth, a categorical imperative of Kant and so forth. These things are really just are too rigid. They don't work at all. And I tried to come up with a theme. So I was kind of consistent, but what happened is I became a little bit more mystical in my thinking. And so I think my book has a little bit of that element of that open-minded openness to the understanding of the basic nature of what life and the world is all about, and so I think it's in some sense my book. I'm not a mystic, I don't think, but it has qualities that some mystics would probably agree with. But also love. And so that basic idea I had, a long time ago has evolved over the years, so that it's a combination of that theme of there's no absolute truth, there's no arbitrary standards, but it's grounded on universal love. I've come up with a whole schema of what that actually means. I developed my theory of plural perspectivism. I talk about my sense of what destiny really is, which is kind of a self-realization. That's what empowerment is, by allowing yourself to be self-realizable, I should say. And so, but when I started studying hypnotism, that it really was a very key point in my work, because it showed me that people have a subconscious block, and that has very strong philosophical implications. And so, by the way, anyone out there who's interested in talking to me in terms of my philosophical counseling and or the hypnotherapy practice, feel free to give me a call. You can call me at 617-964-4800. You can visit my website, arthurdschwartz.com. Or my actual hypnotherapy site, which is integralhypnosis.com. So this was another ramble. I really enjoyed it myself. I hope you got something out of it, everybody. I've had a lot of fun doing this. And so at this point, once again, this concludes tonight's broadcast. Thanks so much for listening. For links to my book, Ethical Empowerment, my philosophical counseling and hypnotherapy practice, and the Social Philosophizers Club, please visit arthurdschwartz.com. And this is Arthur D. Schwartz reminding you to live well and think deeply. Until next time, good night, everybody.
This is Arthur D. Schwartz. You know, beliefs and disbeliefs can be very powerful. Much like philosophy, hypnotism is concerned with belief. Hypnotherapy, a practical application of hypnotism, may largely be described as the practice of removing false beliefs that form mental blocks to success, happiness, and well-being. In my hypnotherapy and philosophical counseling practice, I combine my work in philosophy with hypnotism in order to clear mental blockages that can occur on both conscious and subconscious levels. A mental block may be conscious or subconscious and can be expressed, for example, in the form of anxiety, low self-esteem or low motivation, bad habits, tobacco habits, weight gain, low performance, and much more. If you are interested in using hypnosis and the power of the mind to overcome mental blocks and barriers that have emerged in your life, please feel free to give me a call at 617-964-4800 or visit www.integralhypnosis.com. That's INTEGRAL hypnosis.com.